Hey everyone, welcome to another episode. For this week's episode, I want to talk about how you can find inspiration for your next painting. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. For me, I want to try and pull inspiration from things that I were recently inspired by or influenced by. And I actually did a short trip to Grand Canyon with my wife. It was really beautiful and there were so much cool things to see, things I've never seen before. Like the scale of Grand Canyon was ridiculous. And as we were driving, because it was a long road trip, it was about 8-hour drive, we saw a lot of cattle along the way, and it kind of inspired me for this painting of maybe this girl was down in the ravine of Grand Canyon searching for maybe lost cattle with her dog. That was the original idea for the painting. I started off with a traditional sketch in my sketchbook, and then later on started adding color into Photoshop. And when I brought it into Photoshop, I did some slight adjustments to the drawing because it felt a bit too cramped up. But when I did that, I was ready for painting. So let's just jump into it, shall we? So I wanted to start with a very strong orange in the painting. And the reason for that is whenever I'm painting a subject matter that has a strong feel of one primary color, in this case the orange was because of the bounce light and the rocks itself had a bit of it. It makes it a lot easier to build on top of it than try to introduce it later. So I knew it was going to be a big part of the painting, so I wanted to introduce it pretty early on just to try and get the feel of it across the whole image. Because even in the blues you see some of that orange seeping through, and that was the intention. Also, I'm going to cut out the painting a bit into 2 layers essentially. It's something I like to do slightly when I move slightly forward in a painting, just to make sure, like in the early stage, I just do some simple block-ins before I cut it up. And I like to, whenever I cut up my image, to keep it as simple as possible, because I feel like if you sometimes have too many layers, it gets a bit difficult to try and make adjustments and changes because you start second-guessing yourself a bit too much. So one thing I'm also doing when working on this painting throughout the whole process, I try to keep adjusting my brushes and brush stroke to try and match the flow of the rock itself. And as you see with the lines, like a lot of it's going down and some of it's going forward. There are parts where we do break the general flow of it, but since the rocks in Grand Canyon has been chiseled out over many years of water and wind, it kind of has a very nice structure to it, and I'll try to keep that in mind as I'm blocking and painting in the shapes. And sometimes I go against it, but overall that's the general direction I try to keep in mind whenever I'm doing my brush strokes. And as you can see, I oftentimes end up changing the direction of my brush as well, because whether I paint with the brush horizontally, vertically, kind of makes a difference in how the shapes will read on its own. So keeping adjusting and just keeping that general idea in mind, I think it's kind of important whenever you do your painting, is to try to follow the flow of your shape of your painting. Here also, I used a bit of reference where I was looking at some Studio Ghibli paintings because I wasn't quite sure how to indicate the texture on its rock itself. So whenever I feel confused, I like to look at someone who's done a way better job than me. So Studio Ghibli is something that always inspires me, and I looked at some of particularly their rock paintings to try and get influence and see how can I try and emulate the rock texture in my own way. And the real time for the painting was about 2.5 hours. So I'm not going to have the time to really paint in as much detail as I'd like. In other ways, I'm going to have to find how can I suggest as much of the texture and rock detail as the Studio Ghibli stuff, where they really went in and hand painted all of it. I kind of want to try and keep it more simple and more suggestive and try to find ways of where I can do that. And that's where I find like playing around with different texture brushes can really help add a bit more noise to the image and really give that textured feel to it and a hint of more detail than you actually have in the painting itself. There's a lot of different texture brushes you can experiment and use. I have a few I personally like, but I encourage you to try and explore and find the ones that fits your own work and your own workflow. And I'm also starting to shrink the size of my brush. As you saw early on, the brush was really big and I was just painting in big blocks of shapes. But since we blocked in the majority of the key elements, we know what's in the shadow, we know what's in the light, I can go in with a smaller brush and try to sculpt out some more smaller shapes and chisel out a bit more texture and detail in the image itself. And one thing that I think is pretty fun as artists, we can come up with so many fun ideas for paintings, and I'm always on the lookout for what can I turn into a story, what can I turn into a fun painting or a moment, and I'm always looking for that, and it's much easier to find it's something you're constantly searching for. And I like to also write down in notebooks if I have an idea that I really like, or even if I had a sketchbook for this trip itself. We arrived pretty late at Grand Canyon and I knew we were gonna have much time to sketch, so I was just taking a bunch of pictures of me and my wife, and I tried to just take it all in, and later on when I got home I sat down and I sketched down quickly an idea I had that I was thinking out throughout the trip. and just bring in all the influence of the canyon itself, the cattle we saw along the way, and the general Western American type of look to me is someone riding on horseback with a cowboy hat. I thought it would just be fun to try and mix all the influences into one painting itself. And if you've seen any of my previous videos, my background is as an environment painter, so I feel much more comfortable if I can sort out the background first before I do the character. And at this point I felt like I solved majority of the background issues and I can jump into painting the character itself. I feel like working like this for me also makes it a lot easier to make sure the character blends into the environment itself. Because by establishing the lighting scenario and the colors and everything, it's much easier for me to pop in the character and paint it in and try to make it feel more natural within the image. So we're wrapping up the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there will be something inspiring you next time you go on a trip maybe, or just trying to pull inspiration from your surrounding and try and turning it into a painting. Because I think there's a lot of cool ideas surrounding us. That's always fun to try and pull influence from it. So thanks again for watching and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I also love to hear what inspires you when you do your own artwork. Is it your surrounding that inspires you? Is it other paintings? I'd love to know. Also, I put up an episode each Friday, so keep an eye out and I want to wish you a happy weekend and I'll see you next time. Bye!